So the theme of our next panel is social impact of AI, importance of languages, and ensuring no person is left behind in the age of AI. So let's welcome our moderator, Artur Kiulian. He's founder of RadicalPhilantropies.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming today, and welcome to our panel. My name is Artur Kiulian. I'm a founder of RadicalPhilantropies, and we're a nonprofit dedicating to solving global issues with technology. We've helped White House and medical researchers during the COVID pandemic in 2020. We helped with refugees during the war and the humanitarian aid support when Russia invaded Ukraine. And now we're focusing on bringing awareness to the social impact of AI. So we decided to organize this panel to really create a space for a discussion of this important topic of how do we make sure that no person is left behind in this crazy artificial intelligence race. And for that, we have to bridge the gap between this amazing pursuit of AGI and the actual reality of accessibility and integration of that technology across the world. Because sometimes we take those things for granted here in Silicon Valley, and we forget that the rest of the world has to play catch up. And that's why, we have this panel, and I couldn't imagine having a better panel to discuss this issue. We've got amazing panelists, Dinesh here, veteran of Silicon Valley, advisor to multiple successful startups, both on technology and business. We've got Bryan, co-founder and CTO of U.com. We've got Kasey, head of business of Upstage. And we've got Sandeep, AI researcher and scientist at Mistral. And we've got such a diverse group for a reason. And that's why I'm super excited to kick off this discussion with a simple yet important statement that most of the LLMs, large language models on the market right now, are English-centric, with a few exceptions here and there. And we're fortunate to have not just one, but two of those exceptions here represented, which is Upstage, with roots in Korea, and Mistral with roots in France. So with that, I'll start with Sandeep. What do you think about this current issue, and how do you guys as a company are approaching this kind of like challenging the English-centric wave of innovation, and what are your challenges as a company?
Yeah, thanks. It's an honor to be on this panel. So I think at Mistral, we started off doing things the same way people had been going about it, which is to build English-centric models. And I think you'll notice the first 7 billion parameter model we released is actually pretty English-centric. And this was a conscious decision because building multilinguality into LLMs is pretty challenging. And so we took a sort of incremental approach to going about things from there, which is to first focus on our strengths, which is to then build in support for Western European languages. And so our subsequent releases focus mostly on Western European languages. And the reason for that is purely the fact that we need people who speak the languages in order to be able to vet the quality of data that goes into training these models. And so going forward, we need to build a very strong, culturally diverse workforce in order to expand out from here. And we are in the process of doing that. There are many interesting challenges in doing this going forward.
Thank you. The next one goes to Bryan. You're not necessarily a model company, but you are the direct interface for the consumers, for regular people to actually speak with these models and speak with AI. And I know you're a big fan of languages in general, and you know and read in Latin. What's your perspective on both social and business impact of the current wave of innovation, and what we're going to see in the coming months or years?
Yeah, also honored to be here. Love you guys, and thanks for having me. Is it louder? Need to speak louder? I'm also honored to be here. Even louder? I'm still seeing fingers. Tell me when. Is this still good? Are we good? Still louder? Are you guys serious? All right. I'm also honored to be here. And yeah, at U.com, we are mostly model agnostic. We're really focused on providing amazing answers to users wherever they are, whichever languages they speak. No matter which kind of team they're on, whichever organization they're a part of. We try to meet them where they're at. So the work being done by Mistral or by Upstage that allows us to bridge that last quarter mile between a language model and actually satisfying user intent, especially when it's complex, maybe research-based work. That's very important for us. We've seen user behavior change a lot over the last 4 years, but even before that. And having low resource languages has always been an issue with language models. But now the difference between perhaps giving an amazing answer to someone and giving an okay answer can vary wildly, depending on whether you're speaking to them and understanding their native language, the one that they would naturally express the problem in and would naturally want the response and answer in as well. I think from the business perspective, that is what motivates us. We want to provide those amazing answers. But also from just a social perspective, as you asked, I think all of these languages that I've seen and been studying and seeing different language models, stuff really is lost in translation sometimes, and so that's true for business impact, but also just socially, I think it's important for us to keep up the effort to find ways to generate more data, keep a lot of these other languages alive, and make sure those different perspectives, which might actually be better for problem solving or business use cases, or whatever it is in the long run, I think it's worth investing in that.
Dinesh, you look like you want to add to that.
Good afternoon, folks. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Can everyone hear me? Good. Good afternoon again. LLMs, as I see today, they are the biggest disruption to the human learning abstraction that we have so far, which is the data, information, knowledge, wisdom, DIKW model that I think most of the folks would be aware of. LLMs essentially bridge all the way to knowledge and above at this point, and they are as essential to an individual as education today is, the vocational education at the existential level. Having LLMs that are centric to a specific society or a language disenfranchises the individuals that are not from that society. That divide would not be good, not just for the disenfranchised individuals, it would not be good for the world at large. It is, let me talk briefly about the individual, how this would impact individuals, society as I see, at the existential level, at the awareness level, and what it means, as I see again, the disruption that can cause in the societies. At the second level, what does it mean for human beings and individuals as an agent of change? And the third aspect, which is what can we do about that? The first one, at the existential level, being able to use LLMs at this point for problem solving. Again, at the existential level, imagine a farmer in a developing country that doesn't have to know anything about the specifics of the soil, anything specific about the weather, can get his problem solved as long as he understands the problem. Without that understanding, without having these tools, they would be disadvantaged compared to everyone else in the world. Now, the second part of that is awareness, societal awareness. And I would say that at this point, we probably need to evolve the DIKW model to be data, information, knowledge, concepts of concepts, and then wisdom for the unknown. The awareness side is important from the societal perspective, because a society is essentially individuals one at a time is what would make a society, not the other way around. The governing bodies and the marketplaces don't make the society. And yes, the kind of, I think you may have heard that a society gets the kind of governance and the leaders that they deserve. So the awareness education aspect is the other aspect where the individuals actually need access to. And this is all at the individual level. What does it have to do with languages? Languages, even though we call the most large language models, they do not model language. They model the use of the language. And the subtle difference is important. It is the language modeling, the linguistic, the computational linguists and the symbolic AI folks have been doing that for quite some time. That doesn't capture everything we do, that we know, that we feel, because we try to express a lot more in a language than what the language structure actually entails. What language is capturing is any language, is, and the use thereof is the local understanding and the local culture, and because the individual is in that setting. Okay. You should have told me earlier. Because the individual is in that setting. What language models really, when we talk about serving other languages, what we really are talking about is serving local cultures. The language may be the same, but the local nuances matter, because that's the context in which the individual operates. Without enabling the local cultural aspect, which, by the way, needs to be done in a cognizant fashion, we would otherwise get an averaging effect of across the human corpus, mostly in English, and the averaging effect will create an averaging understanding amongst human beings. That is as problematic as the lack of diversity in the human genome. We know what has kept human beings on planet Earth is the diversity of the human genome. The diversity in human thought is equally important. So one could argue that having English as a language, moving it to English, would solve the problem. As I see it, it would facilitate, it would average out things for governance and for marketplaces. It would rob us of the diversity we need ultimately to be able to solve the problems, the fringe and important problems that we face day to day while being served by the average governance and the marketplaces. So having a common language doesn't actually solve the problem. You need the support of language, which is more the cultural support.
Thank you. That was really, really deep. I appreciate the thought process. And, you know, I would actually throw it back to Bryan, because we had a little interaction And I felt that you were really passionate about describing how reading things in different languages hits you different, right? And I would like to touch upon that because what you, Dinesh, just mentioned about this averaging effect and problem solving, it also hits you different. You approach the problem solving in a different way when you're thinking in one language or another language. And I would love to hear what you, Bryan, think about that, because your solution, you.com, is essentially a problem-solving engine in a way, and you give an interface for people to do that as a tool.
Yeah, I definitely, as a personal experience, just phenomenologically, like my experience in reading in other languages, speaking other languages, I experience something called frame shift. I think a little bit differently. Seeing thoughts when I'm reading them in another language, it can hit different. It can capture different content, subtle nuances, and I think this dovetails really nicely with what you were saying. That experience definitely is evidence for me that these language models that we've been making, I 100% agree. Like ever since before they were large, right? And they were just language models. They've always been models of the language or the language use, depending on how closely you want to cut things. So they're always missing something, right? Models are all wrong. They've been getting better just on some axis, but they don't always capture all the nuances of all the local complexities. And from my perspective, if we can actually think differently in other languages, if other languages are in some sense representing and encoding different kinds of thoughts or emotions or strategies, even different kinds of analogies, right, for how we think about things. We talked about the argument analogy, and thinking about that as war or like a fight, where everybody has points and they have offenses and defenses. But you don't have to think about it that way. You could think about it as dancing with a partner, and someone's leading and someone's following, someone's taking steps, that's a perfectly valid way to think about it. English typically doesn't represent it that way. Or time. Time is represented very differently in different languages, and it goes further than just, that's a reflection of how people think about it. It determines in many ways what we think and how we're thinking and how we're building up our conceptual systems. So I'm a big fan of the idea that language models are models of language, but I don't really want them to become the model for language.
Not models of language, but
they're models of
the
language.
Use of language.
They're modeling language, but they shouldn't become the model for us, right?
So, LLMs model sequence of human utterance without any semantic understanding of the language itself. And it really doesn't model a language. It models the use of language.
Sure.
It's what we call as a language is more of a compression mechanism.
Yeah, I agree.
To convey, and actually more to be able to train our neural nets faster so all of us come up to speed fast. Pictographic languages are not as compressed as the grammatical languages are. Mm-hmm. So, but what we convey in that, LLMs, the reason we have tokens is, and not words as the building block, it was essentially a sequence of utterances. Could be gibberish today, but if you convey something in gibberish, LLMs would capture it.
Yeah, they're statistical models.
That's right.
They are capturing statistical usage. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I would like to posit that it is what they are conveying, which is
Dinesh, microphone, please.
What they're conveying, which is cultural and local. That is essential for us to preserve unless we want everything to be averaged out.
100% agree. When I trained one of the larger open source language models back in 2019, so not large by today's standards, it was really easy to detect using another model what was AI generated and what was human, right? And the I think a very interesting insight from that time was that humans are very good at choosing unique or local or nuanced words that still fit really, really well for a certain context, right? The language model didn't do that. It picked this weird average, this weird gray average that actually no human really talks like that. And so it looks right. It's obeying maybe the rules that it's inferring statistically, but it wasn't human in this really interesting way, which is that it's a model and it's an average that doesn't actually exist in the world. It's just something different from what we're doing, right? I think we agree on that point.
Yeah,
We'll talk more.
I think this was a beautiful exchange that I really wanted to happen on this stage, and thank you guys for going deep into it. Bridging the philosophical aspect, I want to ask Kasey about obviously the question: will one large language model save us all? And what's your experience as a company coming from another side of the world and having a tremendous success in the Asian market with local large language models? Like, what's your experience?
Yeah, hi everyone. Kasey from Upstage. Can you guys all hear me? Good. All right. Thank you. Yeah. So actually, all the conversation that we had, I can bring how that actually works in reality with the language like Korean, where I think Korea is like in a very unique situation where there's enough of, I guess like wealth and technology providers, but not enough resource to have our sovereign AI at a default level. So we had a lot of challenges building, like when we first thought about like, hey, how do we build Korean language model? Then the first challenge that we had is, do we have good data? Like GPT 3, if you look at it, Korean language, I think it's like 0.0139% in the entire GPT, the tokens. And if we were to create a better language model for Korean, we need to collect better data in Korean. But that itself is a challenge, a huge challenge. So what we had to do from the beginning is be really creative. Like, we're not a large corporate, we're a startup. We don't have a lot of data to scrape and train our own models. So what we end up doing is we created this club called 1 Trillion Token Club in Korea, where large enterprises in Korea can share their own IPs in Korean, whether that's a media company, whether that's educational material or their enterprise data. As long as they can share it, we pull that Korean data into one club and then use that data to train the Korean specific LLM, we call Solar LLM. And we agreed to share the profits that are being generated using that LLM. So with that 1 Trillion Token Club, we created an app called Ask Up. Ask Up is like a chat GPT of Korea. It is the largest conversational AI app, just like ChatGPT, that is run on Kakao Chat, which is the largest chat app in Korea. And we powered the app using the Korean language model, and then collect the feedback, and then which can further train the model to improve the Korean language ability. But we thought that having that token, the data collection, and the model will solve the problem, but it's not. Like, data is one, model is one, but you need a whole ecosystem. Like, now people ask about, hey, what is LLM? What do I do with it? Like, if we want to do RAG, like, what kind of infrastructure, what kind of technology do we need? None of that understanding, whether in terms of software solution or even the general audience understanding, is absent. So we had to do the whole educational campaign in Korea to educate the engineers and enterprise executive, starting from the top executives to the engineers, to educate them on the potential of LLM, what it actually means, what it can do, and what's the risk of like using, just open source model or commercially available model without really understanding all the contexts that are not being seen from the surface. So we had to do the whole education for the Korean language ecosystem. So that experience itself taught us, building on LLM it itself is not just a pure technology play. There is a social element that we want to preserve. And as a leader in the AI space in Korea, we've been very intentional about allocating our resource and time to build that ecosystem as well. And to go back to your question, Artur, I think that the challenge that a lot of Asian countries have is going to play out very similar to what we went through in Korea, probably even more so. Like they don't have data in their native language. They probably don't have a technology provider who can build a LLM by themselves. And they also probably don't have an ecosystem who can implement that LLM, whether that's for the consumer use cases or for the enterprise use cases. So it will take the whole village to actually educate and train to build that up. Like if we want to see the full potential of LLM in different parts of the countries, yeah.
Kasey, would you agree that the other challenge is the alignment of these models to the local cultures? It is, that is what effectively makes it human. So whether that is through RLHF or direct parameter optimization, fine-tuning later, but that layer is currently being not done by the foundation models at all in the context of local cultures.
Exactly, yeah.
And because the current foundation models are serving the biggest language bases, and without that alignment to the local culture, the individual is essentially operating outside of their cultural understanding. That creates both a problem for the individual, and then you get the averaging effect. What are you doing on the fine-tuning side?
So those are really difficult use cases, really challenging problem to solve. I think we don't have an answer, obviously, but one way that we've been tackling is, again, the Ask Up app, the application that we're using, where we're capturing the day-to-day conversation of the people using Korean. So I think that can be a one indirect way to capture, the nuances and the cultural context that is not, in media or, other professional, data provider. But I think that's a very important question that we, as a society have to think about. And I think that more of a research and academia, responsibility to also, think about that as well.
I think you're punting the problem. I think you are avoiding the problem. And
as I spoke with every single of you, obviously I had my own thoughts about how to frame the discussion and which topics to talk about. And the more I spoke with each of you, the more I realized how much responsibility someone has to take in all this ecosystem building. And as of recent, literally yesterday, me and Kasey spoke about, the kind of the topic points that we wanted to talk about. And she told me more about this 1 trillion token club. And we, as Radical Philantropies, we started as a nonprofit initiative to actually preserve indigenous cultures. So we got a grant to do this for Navajo language here in US. And we realized, how much money and resources we need and how we need to integrate those communities into incentive structures of this whole ecosystem. So it really resonated with me, the way that you structured that club. And I started thinking about this alliance that basically serves as an enabler for smaller companies like your companies or many more companies out there that actually bridges that gap and shares the responsibility to enable all of these components and bring back the financial incentives into the ecosystem. Because you're right, there's so much complexity in the downstream tasks that it's almost impossible just to rely on, absorbing all of the data on the internet. It simply won't work, right? But there is a way to enable individual villages, communities, and integrate them into ecosystem to help with the data, help with the evaluation, and also, not surprisingly, but also help with the compute. Because, we as a nonprofit, we have our own challenge. Like, it's simply impossible for us to get GPUs and compute. And where do we get those if not from, these kinds of alliances that help smaller companies almost create a counterforce to the big tech that is cannibalizing the resources. So with that, I want to ask you, Sandeep, like, what do we actually need as an ecosystem so we can make sure that Upstage models, Mistral models speak Navajo, speak Ukrainian, speak Polish, all of these languages that are currently underrepresented? How do we make so you guys make those models multilingual and actually enable U.com to all of a sudden to serve all those communities? Because the more I talk with people from other countries, the more I realize how much they're lacking the access to these tools. The other day I was giving a talk and a person from Nepal came to me and they told me, like, we can't use any of these technologies, like nothing. But like, what do we actually need? Is it data? Is it compute? Is it the evaluation? What's your perspective as Mistral?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think you talked about initially about how models are fundamentally English centric, and I think that starts from the very first things you sort of build when you were starting to train LLMs, like a tokenizer. So as an example, the GPT-4 tokenizer just before GPT-4o was massively underrepresented in some of the most spoken languages in the world, like Chinese, Hindi, etc. And it's only with GPT-4o that they actually addressed the tokenizer sort of representation. And so this is something that I think open source model building companies can help with. I think in the end, open source models have to open source tokenizers. And so these tokenizers that are adequately represented, adequately represent many, many languages in the world today is a good starting point. For data, I think there were a few good initiatives that have existed for pre-training data. I think the Bloom project that was quite a few years ago at this point actually did a lot of this thought in how do we make sure that the data going into pre-trained models is of adequate quality, and how do we know people who actually speak the languages have vetted this data. And so they did a really nice thing of actually vetting, getting people who speak languages to vet the quality of data that went into Bloom. And I think they thought of multilinguality from the ground up. And I think that was pretty impressive. So we do need a lot more of this going forward. I think the community will actively participate in data quality analysis. A similar thing happened for StarCoder, where they've the community vetted quality of code on the web, and I think a lot of these are really good steps. And they also did suggest filtering heuristics on how do we filter out poor quality code or poor quality language on the web. So I think data is of course very critical. There are very interesting research challenges on how do we scale out the number of languages that go into a model without damaging the quality in other languages. I think like Kasey said, the amount of representation of Korean in GPT is really, really small. But maybe there is a way to avoid this curse of multilinguality, quote unquote, when scaling out to models, and sort of considering synergistic languages, if you have very good quality in one of the Eastern European languages, maybe that's sufficient to sort of cover a bunch of these different languages and coverage of them. Similar thing from a cultural point of view as well.
Sandeep, so not every minority language would be able to train the model bottoms up, especially
Dinesh, microphone. Yeah.
not every minority language would be able to train the model bottoms up,
Absolutely.
especially if you're doing the tokenizer again, which is needed. The step I don't hear the research or the commercial community talking about is once the tokenizers are put in place, how do you realign to train data so that one doesn't have to pay the training cost of a trillion token aspect every time for a minority, because that becomes the impediment to enabling local languages, minority languages. And if I may, I think the real word here should be minority cultures, because we really are not modeling language. I will continue to insist. Even though many societies speak English, we know that culturally they're expressing different things in the same language. So it's so that aspect. How do we capture after the tokenizer a way to use the pre-trained data so the societies, local cultures, do not have to do that every time, because that would be the prohibitive task that keeps them out of this, the use of the technology. I have another one, but I want to hear what do you think?
It's a very exciting research topic on how do we hot swap tokenizers once a model has been trained. I think there are a few things that you can do. One is, of course, like prevention is better than cure. So you like design the tokenizer fundamentally covering many like written scripts. So you make sure Cyrillic is adequately represented to cover a lot of these Eastern European languages. The same thing for like Indic scripts. You make sure that Devanagari and similar scripts and a lot of the Dravidian languages scripts are covered in your tokenizer training distribution, so that even if you did not collect enough pre-training data for that language, you can always adapt, provided your tokenizer accurately, has enough coverage for those things. A few clever things that have been done is, from a very technical standpoint, is like backing off to bytes in the event that a particular character is not present in the vocabulary. Most models do this today, and that's how, even though models like GPT did not design for like Chinese, Japanese, or Korean from the ground up, they still do pretty well, but they're just very slow because they process things almost at a byte level rather than like at a multi-token level.
Are you ready for the second one? So the second one is when we have the voice interface enabled, which is happening, the accents and the intonation of the voice itself and the tokenizing on the accents. That itself is another problem that needs to be addressed, because I do expect, especially in the developing countries, the interface to be voice more often than it would be a text interface.
Dinesh, the microphone way closer. Please.
Okay.
It's too golden of a knowledge not to capture.
Okay. So that aspect is another important aspect that needs to be done. And I'll pose it to Mistral, I'll pose it to both of you as service providers. What are you thinking of doing in that aspect?
Yeah, I think this hits home because my mother tongue is Tamil, and the spoken and written forms, especially today, are pretty different. Like a lot of the literature is quite old, and the written literature is quite old, but for the language that's spoken today is very different. And you'll find that there is this clear like distribution gap, data distribution shift between sort of like written Tamil, which is a lot like old ancient scriptures, and the kind of thing that's spoken today. And so it's a very hard problem to solve, and so we just need to be mindful that we have people who understand these nuances, building your data from the ground up, and collecting things from sources, and understanding the sources from which your data comes from, and like being mindful of this. I think that's the easiest, or sort of like.
One thing I'm not hearing is the alignment. the alignment aspect, both on the voice side and quote unquote the culture side, is what would make it usable by the local cultures. So we're talking about the front end, we're not talking about the back end. What do you think? What do you all of you think? And we'd love to hear also in the previous thread what you thought about.
Are you guys doing any sorts of fancy alignment tricks that you're able to share?
I think in this regard, a lot of things can be done for just having like a diverse pool of humans coming up with your prompts, like culturally diverse. And so I think a non-starter is like having a model generate prompts, like because the model has certain like distribution biases. And so in order to overcome these biases, you need to like reach out to a pool of people who are well versed with that local culture in order to build prompts that sort of test the model on these like sort of like local nuances. So I think that's something that we absolutely need to do.
Yeah, which again comes back to the enablement of community and people around the world actually participating. Because I can't imagine any company, including OpenAI or Google or any others, actually having resources and caring about this aspect, the nuanced aspect of enabling it for the diversity of cultures.
Artur, actually on that front, the incentives for the large companies to enable the minority cultures is not there when they have bigger fishes to fry.
Right.
So the
business
incentives
models
need to be to serve the incentive gradients will take actually startups, will take entities that are passionate about it, that can create the right incentive structures using capitalistic structures, which is the best we have as human beings today, while also pulling in the governmental awareness and the universities in the ecosystem to be able to do the appropriate data curation, other aspects of it. So I see it as an important problem that needs to be solved, but the incentives are not there for the large foundation models providers to do it today. That's where the other entities need to step in.
Yeah, awesome. We're out of time, but this has been amazing. And hopefully you guys enjoyed the discussion as well. With that, we'll definitely do more of these sessions. So be on lookout. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.